Hello, everyone, and welcome to another IG Live. My name is Brad, and I am a life coach, and I do a lot of IG Lives with a lot of different people to give space and create a safe space so that people can hear different stories and where different people are at and realize that they're not alone. And so I'm going to be joined today by a very special guest who I've been wanting to do an IG Live with for a very long time. And so we had the opportunity to talk. And I see that she is just logged on now. And so we had the opportunity to talk just a little while ago. And I'm just excited about what she has to say and to be able to share her journey and her thoughts. I will say this right off the bat, that there is a trigger warning here. So anybody that is struggling or has struggled with eating disorders or anything alike, just know that this will obviously cover this. So there is a trigger warning attached to this. And so if you could go ahead, Genevieve, and go up and request to join. I don't know if you've done that yet or not, but request to join me. And I will let you in, and we will start to talk. I don't know if we covered that part or not. So let me see if I can do something on my end. Nope. Okay. I know you'll find it should be a little button next to your name that says, about joining. All you have to do is push that, and it should get you on here. So that being the case, I'd like to welcome everybody here. Just as another reminder, those who have just logged on, there will be a trigger warning attached to this IG Live. It will cover everything from eating disorders to body images issues and whatever have you. And so just be aware of that. And so if you are struggling or struggle with any of that, and you have those kind of triggers, just to warn you ahead of time. So that being the case, Genevieve, why don't you go ahead and there we go. View request. Yep. And we're this one as well. Of course, I get excited about all of them, right? But this is great. There you are, my friend. You're good.
Hello.
Hi. Good to see you again.
You too.
How has your day been?
It's been good. Just a typical stay-at-home mom day, so it's been
That's a
very
busy.
loud, but it's nice and quiet now. So it's been a good day.
That's a busy day.
Yes.
So if you could call it typical, it's mostly exhausting at times. Fulfilling, but exhausting.
Yeah.
So I was giving everybody, I'm sure you probably heard everybody, a trigger warning about some things we may talk about. Just so you know, I cannot thank you enough for being on this Instagram Live with me. It's truly an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me. This is my very first one I've ever done, so I'm
Well,
sorry if I seem super awkward. I'm trying to look at the right spot.
I don't know if there is a place to look that's the right spot. I haven't figured it out either, so you're all good. So for our audience today, for those that are going to be watching or watching, those that will be watching later, why don't you just take a moment, and if you would just introduce yourself.
All right. Well, my name is Genevieve. I currently live in a very small town in the rural Midwest with my husband and two little boys and our two giant German Shepherds. I am a stay-at-home mom just for this season, which has actually been way harder than any job I've ever had. So it's not easy, but it's been good.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. So I'm used to the beach life, and living surrounded by cornfields isn't my personal preference, but I love the people I'm surrounded by, so it makes up for it.
You can always endure something if you're surrounded by friends or the people that you love.
Yes.
For you.
Yes. Absolutely.
Season of being a stay mom slash dad as well, and it
Yeah.
was probably the toughest job. Um,
Yeah.
I really like my wife would come home and I'd look at her and go, "They're killing me." They were two, so they were all over the place. I love them. I love my kids. I wouldn't have changed that though.
Yes.
For taking a moment, introducing yourself. So I'm just going to jump right into it. If that's
Okay.
uh, jump right into questions. So, um, if you wouldn't mind, and tell us a little bit about religious upbringing.
Yes. So, as you can imagine, by growing up in South Carolina, I grew up very much in the evangelical Bible Belt. So, from as early on as I can remember, we, my family was at our Southern Baptist church. Every time the doors were opened, we were very heavily involved in every aspect of serving, and just being a part of that Baptist church community. Um, all of my family were part of that denomination. Um, I was homeschooled from first through eighth grade, and our homeschool co op was actually at the church that we also went to. So, um, church and that world was very deeply integrated into every aspect of my upbringing. Um, but it was very, I know a lot of people have a lot of negativity and trauma attached to experiences within that world. But I can say for myself that the home I grew up in was one that was extremely loving. It was very safe. Um, and so I don't want to, you know, make it sound like that's where this is going to go.
Right.
um, but but the reality was that I was very deeply entrenched in the Southern Baptist world from birth till age like 25. Yeah.
Which is interesting because when we talked the first time,
Mm-hmm.
you had made it very clear that you didn't come from a family of unloving parents. Uh,
No.
that you weren't cast off for where you are now. We'll get into that a little bit later, but you had
Right.
a pretty good relationship with your family,
Yes.
things considering. Right?
Yes.
So I think that's interesting. So obviously, growing up in this environment, you encountered none other than the huge topic of purity culture.
Yes.
Um, and for those of us who are not familiar with the purity culture, which I'm sure you are, everyone is here. It's basically another way in which, especially Southern Baptists, um, use a systematic way of using a person who can they control your body. Let me just put it that way, right?
Yes.
They tell you what to do, when to do it, what not to do. What I mean, they basically use it to control you. And to this day, religion still does that. It's not just one segment of time like in the 90s where you had the rings and everything like that. There's more with that. So, how has purity culture impacted your life? Like, tell us a little bit about that with you.
Okay. So just to your point of what you said about control, that is, I think, a great word that encapsulates pretty much what all of purity culture represents. Is it's a way of controlling a major area of both men's and women's lives and bodies, you know, specifically sex and sexuality, in order to create what evangelical Christianity um, would call a reflection of the biblical picture of marriage. So, growing up in that world um, of purity culture, those words control or anything like shame, confusion, anything like that was, of course, not used, because people would just be like, well, that's crazy. I'm not going to participate in that. But the entire concept of remaining pure, emotionally, sexually, physically, for a future spouse, is basically what that entire system is built upon. And as a woman, pretty much from the age of puberty on, you are taught in a very loving and caring manner, of course, that your existence, and your body as a woman is either you are preparing to be the possession of a husband, one, or two, your body and your sexuality is a temptation to a man. And as a woman, it is your responsibility to conduct yourself in a manner that is honoring to your future husband, which is really kind of messed up when you think about, as a child, you shouldn't even be thinking about that. But, the reality is most women hit puberty when we're not living in the world as women, we're still kids. So basically from the age of puberty onward, your innocence is lost, and you then are to be conducting yourself in a manner that is pure, to prepare for belonging to that spouse. So that, I very much absorbed and took to heart all of those messages, that were just everywhere, in books and movies and Christian self-help and conferences and talks in youth group and all that kind of stuff. There really was no getting away from it. That was just the way that it was. So I knew all of this, and I think I mentioned something to you when we talked before, but when you already are a people pleaser and a perfectionist, and you have a set of rules presented to you that is the best way to behave to please the people around you, you're going to do everything you can to fall in line with those rules.
Yeah.
And so when I stopped looking like Timothy Chalamet and started looking more like a woman, somewhere around maybe 10th grade, and I started to notice the attention of boys, and not in a creepy way, but just like natural. That's
Sure.
what happens. I was like, oh my goodness, like, by basically just existing as a woman and looking like one, if one of my peers or an older man, which again, super gross, and I shouldn't even have been thinking that, but if he sees me and my body and has a thought that causes him to stumble, that is my responsibility to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to keep that from happening. And so, because I was kind of like later down the line to come into that space where I was considered a woman, as some of my peers, I saw what was happening to girls who hit puberty before me, which was they got really zoned in on as you need to be hyper aware of how you dress, how you conduct yourself, the things you say, the way you sit, the width of your tank top, all that stuff. And um, just by looking like women, they were somehow had this like wash over them of being automatically dirty. And that was, again, super messed up and not okay. But I had so much anxiety and fear around suddenly becoming one of those, um, or being perceived that way, that I was like, all right, well, I'm going to do something about this. And I'm literally going to make myself disappear. And that was not my conscious thought process at the time. I know now that that's what I was doing because I'm doing well now, and therapy and all that stuff. um small things like that. But I did not want to exist in any space as a woman where I might cause someone to stumble, basically. And so I became hyper controlling of everything that I ate, um, to feel like I was in control of something I had no control over, which was the changing of my body and uh, what naturally happens to everyone. But um, it, I obviously had no control, and in fact, I was the one being controlled by um, how much I was restricting myself eating, and it just really wasn't good. It was not good times.
Right. Right. So basically, I mean, you said subconsciously you were doing this, right?
Yeah.
So, and that makes sense. But you're brought up in a way which you are to follow the system that was created by men.
Yes.
Now, obviously, men create for men a lot of times, right? And so, um, it's amazing to me that as a preteen and as a teen that you're able to recognize that somehow, and I don't believe it, but somehow your body's the enemy,
Yeah.
right? But then again, it does parallel with Christianity because they set you up and basically saying, "Hey, you're born, you made Jesus die on the cross. Basically, because of you, he died on the cross. There's nothing good in you except that which lives in you, which is Jesus." You know,
Right.
and so they set that up so that when purity culture comes around, it's just another thing. You're like, oh yeah, I should deny myself.
Right. Right. And that it also that um the mirroring of the of Christ and the church, the biblical story of the fall, redemption, penal substitutionary atonement, Christ and the church, that perfect marriage.
Yeah.
um, it really does tie closely together with purity culture because you have the idea of the bridegroom and the bride and wanting to present the best of yourself
Mm-hmm.
um, to that male savior, which again is so gross.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
You're right.
but it really is. I mean, that is what it is that the idea of the husband, the godly husband, as the savior, as the pursuer, as the one who comes along and whisks away um, the woman in need of salvation, who's just kind of sitting there waiting um,
Yeah.
to be
Be pure.
rescued. Yeah.
So okay, so you touched on it here a little bit. So you started. whether it's not eating or whatever have you, how bad did that get? Really, and you know, when did you pull yourself out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I would say that I really began to be very aware of controlling my eating, which did end up developing into anorexia um, towards the end of my 10th grade year in high school. And that continued into my freshman year of college. At the worst point, I remember weighing myself again, but trigger warning because I know this is a very sensitive subject for some people, but um, I felt a lot of satisfaction and control over knowing that I was um, restricting myself, that I was able to keep myself looking a certain way. And um, that gave me this weird sense of validation, even though I was very sick and not well. So I remember at my lowest point weighing myself, and I weighed 89 pounds at the absolute worst that it got. And before starting to restrict my eating, um, I probably weighed 135, 140 pounds. I was a varsity athlete, so I was very strong and muscular, and I literally just tried to carve myself away pretty much.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get back to that still, but what was the reason? Obviously, as you hit college, things began to shift.
Yeah.
So, what was the main reason you left religion or the church? What is it that for you when you're going through all of this?
Gotcha. So, I would say that my uh, exodus from purity culture and my eating disorder really came before my um, leaving of traditional evangelical Christianity. So I'll answer that if you don't mind, because it
Go
kind
right ahead.
of ties closely together.
Five.
So, like I mentioned before, I began um, going down the dark hole of an eating disorder. I was a varsity athlete. I've played soccer um, my entire life. And when I left high school, I wasn't planning on playing in college. I was really kind of burnt out just um, for many different reasons, but I was still very much, I thought I was doing better, but I was still very much in the throes of obsessing over my weight, obsessing over what I was eating when I went off to college. And um, when it was probably around the end of my freshman year of college that I started getting this little tug that I really was missing playing soccer and being a part of that athletic world. And I remember going and trying out actually for my university. I did not know anybody there. I had never met the coach, but I walked in the door and was like, I'd really like to try out. You know, is that something that I can do? And he was like, absolutely. Um, so, long story short, I ended up walking on to the team um, at the end of my freshman year of college. And it was being in that environment around not only women who genuinely did not care what they looked like, um, they did not care what other men thought of them and what they looked like when they were performing athletically with their bodies. And that was also my first real exposure to having a sit down face to face conversation with um, other men who were speaking to me about my body in a way that was very affirming and praising it for what it could do as opposed to what it could be in the context of purity culture, if that makes sense. So I had two male coaches that were basically like, we want you here, we think that you're awesome, you have a lot of skills, but um, we want you to basically put on about 20 more pounds of muscle than you currently have, um, or you're going to get obliterated, basically. And they're like, and we will do whatever we can to help you get there because we think that you're amazing and we want you here. And so um, that was really a pivotal shift for me in having conversations with men about my body, and building it up and for what it could do, in an athletic sense, as opposed to um, me being very afraid to exist in male spaces as a woman because I was somehow afraid of harming them sexually, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that really was what ultimately um, healed me from that whole ordeal, or that was a huge step forward in my healing, was being like, oh, my body isn't either a stumbling block or a um or needs to not exist. It can take up space and it can be strong and it can be um womanly, and I can have men help me get there and it not have to be something sexually motivated. So so that was really when I kissed purity culture goodbye. Beginning that that process.
That's so positive to hear. And so naturally, when you began this process and you kicked that goodbye and you had these great experiences,
Yeah.
and you started to love yourself, okay,
Yeah.
and your body. Um, Obviously, that's kind of a deconstruction process, right? And so, how did your religious family respond to that?
So to be honest, that that whole thing that I just went over with the purity culture stuff, it's only been very recently, like within the last year, that I've been able to sit down with some members of my family and be like, hey, this is what was actually going on with me. It wasn't just because I had anxiety or whatever. I now know what I was going through was something very specifically motivated, and here are the reasons why. And um, my immediate family has been incredibly supportive, incredibly kind, and I, other than the things that I've shared on Instagram and one-on-one conversations I've had with um, some very close friends, it's not something that I've actually talked about a whole lot. So I don't know if that answers your question very well, other than to say I honestly don't really know how my very extended family would take it because I haven't really gotten there yet.
Okay, all right. It's at your own time. That's the beautiful part of it, right? So,
Yeah,
it can happen. It can never happen. It's totally up to you. God,
right.
Chris is saying hello, hello, goddess. Good to see you. Um, so, one of your passions is to help women own and value their own bodies. Um, you talked really a lot about this when we talked on the phone, and it's obviously on your page all over the place, right? And
Yeah.
so, explain that passion to us if you don't mind.
Yeah. Um, so I would say, in regards to bodies and purity culture, when I look back over, so much shame and just really lack of education that I had around so many issues regarding sex and sexuality, had a lot to do with the fact that within purity culture, really abstinence education is the only form of education that is given to um, women within that environment. So basically, when you hit puberty, you're given the this is what's happening to your body uh, talk and the very, very basics of everything. And then um, you need to abstain from all sexual activity until marriage. And then, so you maybe hear this information, as a child, and then you go through high school, college, however long it takes for you to find your spouse, remaining pure, not really talking about anything to do with sex or sexuality, not discussing anything. It's really very taboo. And then right before you get married, and I mean right before, like when you're engaged, like the week before your wedding, then somebody might give you a book that's like, you can read this now because you're about to get married. And it's some book written by some old white dude in the 1980s that's like,
Now, I did have a question here. She did ask about kissing as well. Was that
oh,
part of that, or how did that fit in?
so it really, they'll say it depends person to person. So the way that questions, what I remember from my high school abstinence class was you shouldn't be asking, is kissing okay? Is frontal hugging okay? Is making out okay? So you shouldn't be asking, how close can I get to the cliff's edge? The
Yeah,
cliff's edge being like sex, which I guess is total depravity.
keep going because
Uh,
this talk.
Yes, how you not how close should you be getting to the cliff's edge, but how far away can you stay from it?
Right.
So the question shouldn't be should I be kissing? It's what can I be doing to protect my purity and the purity of the person I'm dating. So really that should answer your question, which means no.
Yeah. Uh, if you're having any kind of impure thoughts or any kind of passion whatsoever,
Right.
make room for Jesus. Right. I mean, that's
Right. Yeah, pretty much.
oh, that's
Yes. Yes. And so that lack of conversation, that lack of education, and that huge gap between coming into coming into puberty, and finding a spouse or a partner, I think is so detrimental to so many women because it does create this stigma of uncertainty and shame and just lack of self-awareness in general around all topics related to body positivity, sex, sexuality. And you really can't just flip a switch after years of being indoctrinated with these shame narratives to, oh well, you're married now, so go nuts. Your your body does not think that way.
does.
So
It doesn't.
yeah.
I mean, I think when we talked, I maybe mentioned that I was a people pleaser like you.
Hmm.
Walked the straight and narrow, never rebelled. Um, I'm hanging on till I get married to have sex, and I did. 27. All right. Um, And that should tell you how indoctrinated I was, right?
Yeah.
um, and you know, of course, I was a pastor for 25 years, but then I, then I got married, and you're right. It's like, okay, now you can just do whatever the hell you want to do,
Right. Right.
right? And
You have all this freedom, but you
I,
really don't know what to do with it.
I,
And
I
yeah.
didn't. A matter of fact, I remember the mental anguish of still feeling guilt.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, I had a lot of crap to work through that period,
Yeah.
to where, you know, it took a while for me to reprogram my mind and saying, okay, this is okay.
Yes. Yes. Because like what you and I talked about before, as a man, I mean, you really are taught to believe that any type of sexual thought, sexual urge, just natural biological response is innately lust driven or sinful. And
Yes.
so it's the same, it really is just the same thing, but the opposite side of the coin, that you are setting people up to really have terrible marriages because they neither have any idea of their own wants or needs, or maybe even just general knowledge of how things work, and then you're inevitably unsatisfied and confused and upset, and your body is carrying all of this trauma, and you're like, what? I thought this was supposed to be amazing and earth shattering, and
Right. It's the
you
best.
know, the, yeah, yeah. So that's that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but really, I hope that just by talking openly about the things that I've been talking about with writing, that I can continue to open the door wider for women like myself who have been through um, the indoctrination messages of purity culture and are now healing from them. As you know, I am a 30-year-old woman, that they don't have to get to be my age or be married for 7 years before they start to really figure things out, that it can begin happening much earlier in a much healthier way without that stigma of shame and confusion and secrecy, um, because there's not anything shameful about it.
Speaking of that, we have another comment here by God. It says, such thoughts are so natural, especially teenagers or adulthood, right? Did you both just try to block these thoughts completely, or let them play out in your mind?
Let's see. Well, I watched Twilight a lot, so which was written by a Mormon lady who was very much put purity culture messages like throughout that trilogy. So that was about as crazy as it got for me.
Yeah.
Um, but the uh, I can honestly say that like this sexual fantasizing, not so much. When you're able to starve yourself down to 89 pounds, you're also pretty effectively able to like shut down your thoughts. So, which is super dark, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that wasn't something I did so much. But that that longing and that obsession that purity culture instills in you for this like perfect romantic partner, 100%. I was obsessed with the idea of being married way before I should have even been thinking about being married.
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I remember being a preteen, being obsessed with being married.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every person I was going to date was going to be my wife. You know, I mean,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
what that culture does to a person.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And the level of pressure that it puts upon normal very innocent, adolescent relationships, is is just insane. Like, as a 14, 15-year old, you should not be hanging out with a boy and being like, oh my goodness, I need to keep, you know, I need to sit a certain way because he's somebody's future
Yeah.
husband and I'm somebody's future wife. Like, that's just um, very came from a place of love and well meaning, but that doesn't mean it was good.
Yeah. Okay.
Healthy.
Lisbon 12.
Hmm.
Oh, you.
Oh,
I'll let
I
you.
know Liz.
Yes. Um,
Homeschool co-op days.
Homeschool co-op days.
Yeah.
Okay, so knowing you've been through all of this and gotten through
Yeah.
all, okay, how did you find the strength to walk on your own, to walk this path? What kept?
Um, it's probably gonna sound really weird, but um, before I had my first son, he's 3 now. I worked for several years in a long-term care facility as a CNA, so a nurse's aide in a nursing home, and being in that environment really opened my eyes to the astonishing short amount of time that we have on Earth. And I, literally daily, I would have residents grab me and tell me to not waste my youth, my beauty, that, all of that stuff. But they were very sincere, as in, like, you have no idea how quickly your life is going by and how you're going to wake up one day and be 89 years old and you're going to be like, where did it go? Um, and I wish I could say that I read some profound book or had, some profound experience that pushed me into writing actually about what I'm passionate about and speaking about it openly like I am with you now. But it was really that experience um, of taking care of people who were at the end of their life and who were so insistent on wanting me to take advantage of every opportunity that I have in the season that I'm in my life. That really is what pushes me and motivates me to just not care anymore, I guess, is the right way of putting it, and not in a way where I want to hurt people or harm people, or be disrespectful, but to just be like, they're right. So I should be living like my life is extremely short because
Yeah,
it is. So,
totally,
yep.
totally. I mean, that's something that's hit me. The older I get, obviously, it's like, man, where has that time gone?
Yeah.
And why did it have to spend so much time in the church?
But you were having, I know you've been through all this, but having extremely valuable experiences and learning things that you haven't just tossed totally out, but you're using those things now to
Yeah, I
do
mean,
what you care about.
that's a nice way of putting a bow on it. You I'm definitely using my past experience in the church to help others that are going through the same thing,
Yeah.
constructing. So, God has had a couple more things to say here that were really good. Obviously, um, I feel like I could relate on some levels how you both raised it, on purity culture. She wasn't raised in purity culture. However,
Okay.
she did have traditional Indian parents that try to hide
Okay.
reality and not, not really teach her much about it. So,
Gotcha.
she has a different, unique experience with that kind of purity. And I'm finding that with religion in general, or culture in general, however you
Yeah.
put it, that they all have different ideas of what to learn, not learn, or be oppressed with, or, I mean, it's amazing to me. So that being the case, let me ask, so we're wrapping up, and once again, obviously a huge fan of yours.
Thank you.
I've been following your page. I think you're amazing at what the content you're putting out, the message you're putting out, and I don't feel, I feel that it's very genuine and loving. Not like you've got a bone to pick. Not angry on your page, healing on your page, and so Genevieve, I just want you to know that it's an honor to know you and get to know
Well, thank you, Brad. You
that.
as well. Thank you.
But for people that want to follow you on your journey, right? What's the best way they can follow?
So the best way is really just by following my Instagram at the Anatomy of Purity. That's where I post the most consistently, and I'm really trying to focus on that space. So yeah, that is where they can do it.
All right. Well, I mean, there's so much more we could have covered because obviously you are not easily covered in 45 minutes. And I know you have so much more to say, and so maybe we'll do another one sometime.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
So I'd be honored if you would. So
I'd love to.
for everyone that's joined us, thank you. For everyone watching the replay, thank you for watching that. Let me encourage you once again, pop on over the Anatomy of Purity and give her a follow. You won't regret it. She's uplifting, positive, and has an amazing message. And so please do pop over and give her a follow.
Thank you. And do the same for Brad dot life coach.
Yeah, the dot is important, right?
Yes.
So thank you for being here, Genevieve. You are amazing. Much love to your family.
Thank you.
And we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.